sex and self are not dualistic, right? There's not me over here and my sexuality over here. Sex and self are one. So if we are ignoring this essential piece of our entire embodiment or this essential piece of our health, we're really rejecting or ignoring that essential part of ourselves. Sex has not been talked about in a way that is empowering or informative or health-based. And it really is. Sexually healthy people are healthier people.
Welcome to another episode of Entrepreneurs in Recovery podcast. I am so excited that you are here today. And thank you so much for going ahead and liking and subscribing to the show on YouTube and also leaving a review on Spotify or iTunes. Really appreciate that. It helps people reach the show. As you know, last week I had released my first ever solo episode, and I hope that you enjoyed that and the feedback we're getting about that show. Just really grateful for each and every one of you. And I promise there'll be more solo episodes where we will dive into many of my different experiences with different psychedelic medicines or anything that's requested by you using the listener submission form or just reaching out and saying, hey, I'd love for you to talk about this issue or this challenge or this idea or this topic. So please go ahead and reach out and let me know what would you like me to talk about. But I have some things in mind that I've been sitting on to share with you all. So I'm really excited to share that with you. So my guest today is Dr. Holly Richmond, and this episode is very special because this is the first time I brought someone on who is an expert in sex addiction, sexual trauma. Dr. Holly Richmond has written an amazing book. In this episode, we get into many topics that are and have been uncomfortable for even myself to talk about because of the stigma around sex and pleasure. And so we talk about, what it's like to be sex positive and what it's like to, um, be more open and more carefree in this space of desire and sex. And it's something that I really don't ever really talk about publicly. And so I hope you enjoy Dr. Holly Richmond's vulnerability, my vulnerability. She talks about her amazing retreat she runs in Mexico for women survivors of sexual trauma. So I really hope you enjoy this episode. It's one of my favorites. Enjoy. Hey, Dr. Holly Richmond. Nice to see you here today.
Thank you, Jesse. It's so nice to be with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited about today's interview because, well, for many reasons. One of the reasons is because I met you through my 5 training. So anyone who's listened to this podcast before, they've heard about 5 with Joelle and Victoria, Tandava. And, so we're going to get into that today, but that's where we met, and we'll get into that story. But your section of the training was extraordinary. I think I was telling you, I have 6 pages of notes from things that you said, things from your book, and really mind-blowing statistics that are pretty heartbreaking, a lot of them, about sexual trauma and sexual harassment and abuse. And so I'm really excited to have you on today as an expert and talk about these things that, in many ways, many of us avoid for many reasons. Maybe it's the way we were brought up or whatever, Christianity or these different value systems that I personally was brought up in, and it doesn't have anything to do with the religion maybe, but just the taboo subject of not talking about this stuff. And so I'm so excited. And I would love to start out with letting the audience know a little bit about your story, like what got you into this work and maybe a little background about yourself.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And like I said to you before we pushed record, it means so much to me that the work resonated with you, and you have 6 pages of notes. So I feel a kindred spirit there, and it is. This is important work, and it's hard to talk about. So the shorthand of my story is I was a journalist for 15 years. And towards the end of that time, I read a book that changed my life. It was called True Notebooks by Mark Salzman. And Mark was a writer, creative writer, journalist, and he went into a boys' detention facility in Los Angeles and started teaching creative writing, just volunteering, teaching creative writing once a week. And the stories that he wrote about that the boys would write and how their lives changed and how his lives changed. I closed the book, Jesse, and I was like, I need to do this. So I was living in Ojai, California at that time, just north of Los Angeles. And this was back like when you would pick up the phone and call people. So I just started calling detention facilities in my area. And there's a girls' detention facility in Camarillo, California. And I called and I said, I want to come teach there. And they said, for free. And I said, for free. So for 2 years, I went in once a week and just did creative writing workshop, journalism workshops with the girls. And during that time would get story after story of sexual trauma. So gang rape, sexual abuse within the family, date rape, all kinds of horrific sexual violence. And the girls would write about it like they would write about going to 7-Eleven, or they would write about hanging out with their friends. Like there was just no emotional attachment to the story. And all I could do at the time was say, that's not okay. Is there anything I can do to help? And I had zero training. So that prompted me to go back to school, and I got my master's in clinical psychology, got my doctorate in clinical psychology with a somatic psychology focus, and got my somatic sex therapy certification. I did most of my 3,000 hours at the Santa Barbara Rape Crisis Center. And I quickly learned there that I was taught very well how to treat sexual trauma, but I wasn't taught how to treat what comes next. So my question was, how do I help survivors have great sex life and really healthy relationships after surviving these things that they've been through? So that's what I wrote my dissertation on back in 2012. And then in 2021, I turned that into my book, Reclaiming Pleasure, a sex positive guide for moving past sexual trauma and living a passionate life.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you for having that passion to serve and help those women, and the passion that you've had. And obviously, I didn't know it was that recently where you finished your dissertation in your book. That's amazing. So
Yeah.
congratulations. And I would love to get into a little bit about that book. I didn't get to read the whole thing, but I listened to some of it, and I've definitely took a lot of notes from your teachings in the course. But maybe we can talk about something you talk about in the book, being sex positive. Maybe just we can educate the listeners, because I didn't know a lot about this stuff either, and then we can just kind of flow from there. That sounds good.
That sounds perfect. Yeah. So, sex positivity, my simple answer there, a simple definition is all sex is good sex as long as it's consensual and pleasurable. So, we literally have two boxes to check when we're talking about good sex: consent, first and foremost, every time, pleasure, secondary. So we don't get to use words like weird. We don't get to use normal. We don't get to use perverted. We're not going to add those judgments in. If the sex someone is having is consensual and pleasurable, it is good.
Okay, that's good. That's simple.
That's
Yeah,
it.
I was thinking about, as you were talking, like I was looking at your recent Instagram stories or your Instagram posts, and I even found myself like not feeling shame, maybe is not the right word, but just be like, wow, this is really, like one of them was like the taste of semen, and one of them was deep throating, and one of them was doggy style. And when I look at those posts, it's like we don't, in this society, I think, especially with maybe with like internet pornography and the shame that comes around and that's talked about with some of these subjects. It's as someone who's personally struggled with internet pornography since I was a child, because it was a coping mechanism to numb out my nervous system and in these ways of feeling in my body. I found myself, with all the work I've done, still like, wow, you got to be brave to talk about that. But I think it's just because of our society, it's not normalized to have conversations around these things that you're talking about, and you've probably had hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations about with different clients and people you've talked about. So, like, what can we do to start to normalize some of these conversations around sex and how it happens and all these things that you're investing a lot of time answering in these different magazines and different shows. So love to
Yeah.
just hear about that.
So first, I think it is just practice. This did not come easily to me. So I would say at this point, doing this work for 15, 16 years, 20,000 hours, like I just get used to it. And it's so interesting to watch my client's face when I just lead with, whatever the question might be. Earlier today, do you like anal? And you'll see like a little breath, right? And then there's an answer. I guess my simplest answer, Jesse, is that we all have these conversations in our head and we all think we're weird or abnormal. For some of us, we go into shame depending on our upbringing. So I'm just trying to bring those conversations to light. And I hope I can do that in an authentic way, in a warm way, in a clinically supported way, so it doesn't feel salacious or dirty. So I know, like when Cosmo brings these stories out, of course, they're actually supposed to be titillating. And I know people are thinking about the taste of semen and how can I change it? I don't feel like I can ask my boyfriend about that so it's just serving as a resource.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important. It's a really important conversation. There's so many things that we don't talk about. And the result of that many times is people get really sick or people even die from not having access to information that can be life changing. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on the show was to sort of normalize this conversation. And it certainly wasn't normalized for me. And just the way I grew up, coming in a single parent household, lived with my mom, and she was very, very into Christianity, which is totally fine. But we never talked about sex ever. Like, I mean, ever. It wasn't even an option to talk about it. And so I learned sex at 11 and 12 through internet pornography. High-speed internet came around and I dove right in. And so that was my kind of view of sex was, oh, this is how it happens. And it was obviously an extreme, explicit way, but that's how I experienced it. And then that led to eventually shame as I got into high school, and I would feel shame about that. I think today internet pornography is, I think the highest, the top 20 websites in the world, how many of them are porn? Like 7, and maybe in the top 5, I think there's 1 or 2. So obviously there's a lot of easy access. That's why it's just easy to access. But with that said, like there was no conversations about it in my household, or I wasn't talking to a therapist to be like, wow, these are all the things I'm experiencing and the shame around it personally, just because I wasn't talking about it. I know there's a definition of trauma, right, that you like to use too. It's like, could you give us that definition? And that's going to kind of be the context for where I go.
Yeah. Do you mean the Peter Levine
Yeah,
trauma is not what happens to us? It's what we hold inside with the lack of an empathetic witness.
exactly. So like, that's a really important definition because there wasn't an empathetic witness to many of these things that happened to me, which it made me become a mind person, a mentalist. I stored everything in my mind. I disconnected from the body because I could dissociate my experience. And then I used the dissociation as a tactic all the way into adulthood. And so the journey now is the journey back to the body, right? The journey, get out of the head. The head has been this really interesting place to live. And now it's sort of getting into the body. So I would love to hear, since we just talked about the definition of trauma, could we talk about how, maybe how sexual trauma happens in the body and, it has to be healed in the body? That's something that I heard you say. And could we maybe talk about trauma's role, the body, and then how can someone start to work towards healing this nervous system in this body, which is a lot of work. I know that for sure.
It is. And you just asked a great question and a big question. So I'm going to try to keep myself on track. So the first thing I want to talk about is the 4 F's of trauma. And most of your listeners are going to know at least 3 of them. So the way our bodies react when confronted with trauma is fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So with sexual trauma, most of the time we're going to be in freeze or fawn. For those of you that don't know what fawn is, so I'll just go through the first ones. Fight is what it sounds like. The survivor fights back against the perpetrator. That rarely happens for a lot of reasons. Jesse, I'm sure we'll get into that. Flight, not always an option to run away, especially if you're a child. Freeze, very common response. So freeze is severe dissociation. Your body just says, I can't handle what's going on right now, so I'm going to leave. And a lot of times for survivors will describe it's like they look down on themselves. So if there's a sexually abusive situation happening, they're up here looking down, but they can't do anything about it. The fourth response, the lesser known, is called fawn. And fawn is it's freeze with a smile on your face. Fawn is compliance. Fawn is go along to get along. And this is actually the most common trauma response for sexual trauma. So fawn looks like not moving, but not dissociating. Fawn looks like, so let's say that there was a date rape situation and the perpetrator goes to leave and hugs the survivor and she hugs him back. Or the perpetrator leaves and the perpetrator texts the survivor and says, I had a great time. And the survivor texts back, me too. Right? Like, so it's just that complete compliance. And what that's about is to not get hurt any further. Right? I'm being nice because I just want this to end and I want you to go away. And the way I know how to do that is by being nice to get myself out of it. Fawn is a little bit more common in women than men. And I try not to be very gendered in my work. And Jesse, you see in the book, like I've got every iteration, every identity. And there are some things that female identified do versus male identified do. So freeze and fawn, and girls tend to be good at fawn because we're supposed to be good girls and we are taught to go to people please, go along to get along. So you'll really see that with sexual trauma. The way it gets stuck, and I just look at the nervous system. So 0 is almost catatonic, very depressed. 10 is full on panic attack. So what we're trying to do is get to that 4 to 6 range. A healed nervous system is a flexible nervous system. Healed doesn't mean safe. Healed doesn't mean always calm or always happy. That is so unrealistic. So someone that's really done their work and is feeling better has a flexible nervous system. So when I'm working with people, I'm always tracking their nervous system. Are they constantly in an 8, so they're hyper-regulated, or am I always finding them at a 3 and they're hypo-regulated? And so is it my job to pull them up or to calm them down? So that's kind of the somatic work that I'm doing behind the scenes for all of my sessions.
Yeah, it's so interesting how somatic has become such a big word. It's been where did it came out of nowhere, really. I mean, I went to school for mental health counseling. We didn't talk about that at all. I got my master's, never talked about that. And now, that was 2016. So it's like, I feel like somatic and this working with the body has really, really blown up for a reason. And I don't think many people, even myself, have really dove into the depths of somatic work at the depths it can be utilized. So if someone was to work with a somatic practitioner like yourself, what are some of the things that they would do with you to start to work towards healing this nervous system?
Yeah, so the first one is, and please know, I work almost exclusively online. I do retreats, I do in-person workshops. I'll see my clients in person if I'm in New York or LA, or they want to see me in person. So this can all happen online. So the first is the nervous system regulation. So we're going to do that together every session. And I'm big on homework. So I'm always going to give some kind of somatically based homework. And again, are we going up or going down? When someone says they're triggered or someone says I need to ground, I ground myself. I get a little bit frustrated with that because I don't know what triggered means. Are you triggered anxious? Or are you triggered depressed? When you need to ground, okay, which way are we going? Are we going up or going down? So again, those are the little things I'm working at. So once we figure that out, I will give general somatic homework that's not sexually based to figure out how to get to that point of flexibility. From there, as we build rapport and we're stepping more into the sex therapy work, then I give sexually based homework. So that can be just with themselves or it could be with a partner or partners.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And I think that some of the things that really blew me away when I was taking this information from your book and from your teachings was about some of these statistics, like sexual harassment. 81% of women experience some form of sexual harassment in a lifetime. And then and that's one stat. And there's a couple others. There's one other that is people who are, and I think this is, you can correct me if I'm wrong, like who experience sexual abuse. They wait an average of 10 years before seeking treatment. Is that accurate? Yeah,
That's accurate. Yeah, and I would, it's not just sexual abuse, it's more all inclusive of all types of sexual trauma. So just a quick note on that. Sexual trauma is a blanket term or an umbrella term that I would use to describe rape, sexual abuse, sexual harassment, gender violence. So there's a lot of things under sexual trauma, but each of those definitions, Jesse, you had to sit through that part of my presentation. It is super dry, but you guys, I go through, this is what rape is, this is what sexual abuse is, this is what gender violence is, just because I want people to be able to say what it is. It's really important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just really important for people to hear this. Like I had no idea like how commonplace this is for women. And I'm sure like for men, it's something that I didn't hear a lot about this until maybe in the last couple of years of men experiencing sexual harassment and trauma. I I don't even know if I experienced that because I went through a big drug addiction phase where it's kind of like 4 years of just I did have actually an experience, and I've never shared this publicly, where I was working at Staples, and I think I was like 20 years old, and I was really good at sales, and I was working in the electronics department, and a man came in and said, hey, I want to buy this computer. Can you set it up for me at my house? And I'm like, well, we don't do that at Staples. And he's like, no, I want you to set it up and I'll pay you like $100 cash. And at the time I was just in a bad place. So I was like, yeah, okay, sounds good. You live a town over from me. And I actually went to his house and I set up the computer. And then when I was done, he actually said to me, hey, what can I get for this amount of money? And I was like, and at first I was like, is he talking about what I think I am? And then I just lost it in anger. Like I didn't physically attack him, but I was like, you sick motherfucker. And I ran out, and I did not tell that story until I got into recovery years and maybe a decade or more later. And I wonder how many stories people have like that, they just didn't share. It got like repressed and didn't, do you think that's common that people
I
have that?
know it's common, and it's the hardest group that has trouble talking about this is men or boys. So the stat that we have is 1 in 33. I honestly think that that's a little high because men are more reticent to self-report. So much of my work is with adult men who are sexually abused as children. And yeah, 10 years would be, that's so on the low side for sexual abuse. So I have one man that's in his 60s. He got abused when he was between the ages of 9 and 11. So we've got 50 years it took before he told anybody. 40 years, super common, 30 years, 20 years, 10 years would be low. I'm really hoping that's changing just because, as you've alluded to a few times, we have more language and more people are talking about it. So I think that men know that they're not so alone in this, and it happens so often. And Jesse, thank you. First of all, thank you for sharing that. And just for your listeners, so Jesse did fight and flight. So those were the two. And that I would expect because you were a 20-year-old man. I don't know your size difference compared to the perpetrator, but it was probably equitable. But can you imagine if you were 10 and he was 20? Or can you imagine if you were a woman and he was this big guy? Like it's just like that wasn't an option. So you had different options than other people would have.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's something I repressed. I think I told a total of maybe 3 people, and for some reason it came out in this podcast. But I think it's because I've worked through a lot of that. I've worked through a lot of that stuff. I've had amazing therapists and people I've worked with, but I just want to share that because it did make me feel unsafe in my body because I was I'm not like I'm not short, but I'm a skinnier guy. So I felt like I could be hurt, I could be attacked. And, later, many years later, it led to doing jujitsu and movement classes and things so that I could feel safe in my body and regulate my nervous system in that way. But I was just thinking another part that I didn't even have in my notes to talk about is one of the things, because of all the, what I don't think men realize, and this could be for women too, having access to internet pornography, the most anything at any time in an instant on your phone, can impact your erectile dysfunction or cause that. And I had that, and that's something I didn't become aware of until recently. And the reason why, so when I went to college, I had this opportunity to have all this freedom and all this sex and all these things. And the first time that I went to go have, sex with a woman, I had erectile dysfunction and I had so much shame. And then it happened again in college. And again, I never talked about this till recently. And it was like suppressed. And then it happened later on. And then I was able to sort of work it out with the right person. And because it was psychological, right? It was like, for me, it was psychological. And once I got through that, so it's really been quite a quite a last, I would say year or so for me to work through a lot of these things. And I just wonder how many men are struggling with erectile dysfunction. And do you have any advice or anything about that for someone who is struggling with those types of it?
Absolutely. And thank you too for sharing that. And that is another such a common experience, whether it's about trauma, whether it's about sexual abuse, or whether it's just about anxiety. And perhaps for you it was like a bundle of all of those. And I just want to say, for some therapists, they would consider how you were raised a trauma, a little T trauma, right? Like that hyper religious focus, no talk about sexuality at all. Yeah. So we've got a little T trauma there. Yeah, so I try not to be too pathologizing with porn, because I certainly know plenty of people who can use it in a healthy way. It's moderation, right? But if you're watching porn 3, 4 times a day and you're upping the intensity of what you're watching, which is usually what happens. So someone clicks on at the beginning, they just go to it's so funny. When I ask guys what they watch, they'll say just normal. I'm like, well, what's normal, right? What's normal? But they just go to the most viewed page. But then 2 months later, it's getting more intense, more intense, more intense. And then you're in bed with a real live person and your penis isn't doing what you want it to, because it's used to that intensity. First of all, the intensity of what you're watching. And second of all, now you've got huge performance issues, because you're used to, like, there's porn is so easy. It's like junk food. Like, it just is fed to us. It's so easy. It's right there. No one's watching you when you're masturbating. And now you've got this person in your bed and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to perform, but I don't have the stimuli that I typically do. So I loved your words. Like, you have to work it out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a super normal stimuli, internet
Right.
pornography. So you have this massive dopamine, cocaine-like rush, and now you have a human who's breathing next to you, and they're not. It's like, whoa, how do I activate that? And it can take time to reboot or reprogram. And I've certainly went through many iterations of that recovery journey for myself to be able to work through that. So there is hope, it definitely, like, things are working now, things work great, but it took what it took to get through that. So yeah,
Yeah.
I know.
And I do. So treating sexual compulsivity is certainly something I do for men and women. We're usually looking at anxiety. There's some underlying anxiety there. There could be an issue with intimacy and vulnerability. So I have a protocol that I work through, but my absolute favorite book about this is called She Comes First by Ian Kerner.
Okay, I'll definitely put that in the show notes.
Yeah. So
That's one nice part about a podcast. I get to re-listen to it again and then be like, oh, I got to get that book. I got to make sure.
yeah.
So yeah, definitely, I appreciate that. And for those listening too, like, I don't know how this doesn't affect everyone, sex. So it's like, I think this conversation and someone picking up your book and reading your book and then reading this book that you just recommended, it's only going to benefit your life. I mean, it's something that there's so much packed into this, like, there's just so much. I mean, you look at Instagrammers and different people talking about, harnessing your sexual energy and semen retention and having that power. Like there's so much here. And I
Yeah.
think it's hard to navigate because it can be very black and white too. Like, don't masturbate for a year and then use that semen retention and write 4 books and start a business. And it's like, I've actually done that. I'm speaking from experience. I literally did that. So I went 400 days, no masturbation, nothing. And it was very extreme. And, I learned from that. And there was definitely like the superpowers of semen retention that people talk about. But there was also like, uh, lack of pleasure, and a lot of my stuff was in my head and like really driven and focused towards goals. And I just don't want to live like that now. I want to experience pleasure, and I want to be able to honor my desires and not, like just sort of allow myself to be me. And I think that there's just so much in this, conversation we could talk about. It's so
There
interesting.
it is. Oh my gosh, I've so appreciated you sharing that as well. And I want everyone to do what they want to do. Um, Thank you for saying like there were some bright spots to it. I just want to say, from the sex therapist perspective, Jesse, I hope you're masturbating or ejaculating about twice a week. We know from the research, men who ejaculate twice a week have lower rates of prostate cancer, and it's actually good for you. Plus, like just the benefits of having an orgasm, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin. For a woman, having orgasms, better, a more toned pelvic floor, which helps with urinary incontinence as she ages. And just the more orgasms you have, the more orgasms you want. And again, stress relief, better sleep, immune function. There's a lot of benefits there. And if you want to try Jesse's way, I know there's some more spiritual, I would say more spiritual benefits maybe there, or performance-based benefits.
Yeah, and that's what it was for. It's like
Yeah.
let me test the theories. I'm kind of an all-in guy, so I'm like, let me go the extreme and see what would happen. And yeah, I mean, I was raw vegan for a year. That's really extreme. And so there's all these types of things I've tried. So it's like, hey, if you want to try it, maybe try it for 2 weeks. Like try it, see what that's like for you. But yeah, some of us go the whole way and many things, and I wanted to try it. But definitely today, it's not something that serves me. Something that it just doesn't make any sense. I'm already generating so much energy, especially with my setting now, with being here in the jungle and having this energy here, and a lot of like there's a lot of grounded, but there's a lot of energy. And so, I need to do something with that energy. And I cold plunge. So like cold therapy can increase the sexual drive and libido. So yeah, it just doesn't make sense to not release that at times. So I'd love to share a little bit about like the medicine retreat you did with Victoria, and then talk a little bit about 5-MeO DMT and medicine, and how that medicine done in the right container with the right guides and integration support can really be a catharsis and a healing for sexual trauma. So I'd love to hear about that retreat and how that came about, and then talk a little bit about medicine for a little bit.
Oh, yes. So we've actually had two now. So there's been two women's sexual trauma retreats. So at this point in time, we're just hosting women. For 2025. I hope that can open up, and we would either do a men's retreat or just a mixed retreat for everybody, because I really, my male survivors have a special place in my heart. And I think having a container for them would be incredibly powerful. Um, I'm so glad 5-MeO DMT found me. Like, and I really, that is the story I tell. This medicine found me. And I had dabbled in others. This is, to me, the medicine for sexual trauma survivors. And here's the reason. Jesse, you've read my book, but just very quickly, in my dissertation, grounded theory, qualitative dissertation, I found 3 tenets that were really critical to the somatic recovery of sexual health after sexual trauma. The first one is control. So, of course, that makes sense. Of course, the survivor is going to need to be in control of their body, in control of their situation, who there is around. But control really has 2 components. The first is maintaining control that we just talked about. The second, and almost more important, is the ability to relinquish control. Why that is connected to 5-MeO DMT is because it is fast acting, short duration. So I am a survivor of sexual trauma myself. I am a somaticizer, and we're going to talk about the somatic effects of 5-MeO DMT as well. I cannot tolerate being out of control for very long. I don't know, control issues, that feels way too simplistic, but I just don't like being out of control. And I knew with some of the medicines, I was like, there is no way that my nervous system is going to tolerate feeling out of control for 6 hours or 3 hours or even 1 hour. So with 5-MeO DMT, we've got this fast acting short duration. You take the medicine and you are on your journey, and you are back solidly with your feet on the ground in 20 minutes and 30 minutes and 40 minutes. Like it is just never longer than that. And when you're back, you're back. I knew for survivors coming down to experience the treat with Victoria and myself, like I had to create the safe container and tell them that yeah, they're going to jump off a cliff, but they are safe in their relinquishing control, and they're only going to be out of control for these few minutes, and then they're back and they're here and they're with us.
Yeah, and I think I love that, because the 5-MeO DMT experience, like you said, it's short-lived. You're back. It can be extremely powerful. But, me personally, with my experience with getting to serve the medicine at times and watching many people in the experience, watching their hips thrust and watching this, what's known as a godgasm, where someone gets naked and potentially has an orgasm under the medicine, which is not, it's not, for me, it hasn't been that common, but seeing someone get naked and just this thrusting and this, this just interesting display of sexual movements, and watching the body sort of take care of whatever's stored up in the DNA or in the fascia or whatever, where all this is stored. It's really been amazing to watch that, and then have the participants, male and female, say like, whoa, that was the most, and they don't even know because they were in the medicine, but when they knew later on that something big had been released and some type of catharsis. I would also like to mention that, some people, when they meet 5-MeO DMT and they have sexual trauma, it might be better off to do a session individually. Would you agree? Because maybe there's like some shame around that, or some.
Yeah, and in the retreat, so our first, excuse me, our first retreat was 5 days, and there were 2 medicine days, and then workshops and beautiful community events around that. Our second retreat had 3 medicine days, and we titrate this quite specifically. And Victoria is such an expert on dosing, so we went with the pens, we went with insufflation, then we went with the lamp. So the lamp is the big experience, but we can really figure out what's best. And the ladies had all the first 2 days were individual. They went into the sanctuary on their own. We have a talk about, hey, if you start taking your clothes off, do you want us to cover you, or do you want us to let you be free? Of course, we would never interrupt an orgasm of, I don't know, 20 something people that I've witnessed now. I've only seen one godgasm, and it was not in a survivor's retreat. It was in the couples eroticism retreat that I think you and I talked about
Mm-hmm.
a while ago. Yeah. So I don't want people to be afraid, because I just, Jesse, I know if there's survivors listening, they're like, holy shit, I do not want to have an orgasm in front of people. Like that just brings up so much shame for me. It is not common. And Jesse, you said it's not common. So don't worry about that. And it is the most beautiful thing to witness and experience. And Godgasm is the right word. But 5-MeO is just like, it's an unparalleled somatic medicine. I don't read about or hear about or have experienced anything that just gets in the body as much as this medicine does.
Yeah, I really hope there could be some more positive attention to this medicine, and more peer-reviewed studies can be done, because there's something different, obviously, here with this medicine. And it's why I did the training for a year. It's how I met you. There's something about it that is so beyond my comprehension, that I think it would be extremely beneficial, done with the right setting and the right trained facilitator, to be able to have this experience. And unfortunately, it's still illegal in the United States. So you have to go to Mexico or but I think, there's so much potential. And I think, having this conversation about how it can be extremely beneficial for someone with sexual trauma. I mean, that's a big statement, because it's like, maybe someone has tried different types of modalities and ways of healing, and they haven't tried this. So getting this message out there to say, like, hey, there's this retreat coming up with Dr. Holly and Victoria, and and to be able to go out and experience it in that setting, which I've been to, and have experienced 5-MeO with the lamp. And some people might be hearing the words insufflation or pens and be like, what the hell does that mean? So, insufflation is, essentially snorting 5-MeO DMT. Everything is super meticulous and surgically laid out and weighed. Everything is, but it's, and then there's something called the lamp. Some call it the lamp of illumination, which is can be a very big experience, very quick, but it could also be extremely powerful because it can override the ego many times. So when there's that resistance, the lamp can kind of break through that and get you sort of to that, let's call it the mystical experience, or whatever experience you're ready to have, or whatever soul or higher self, who knows how it actually works. But yeah, it's really exciting to know this medicine exists for sexual healing. This is amazing.
Absolutely. And just for your listeners, there were some survivors at the retreats who stuck with the pen the whole time. They're like, no, I'm willing to relinquish control this much, but not as much as the lamp, because the lamp, it can be a big experience. And again, Victoria's beautiful at dosing. She can make it lesser or more. I knew for me in my first journey with 5-MeO that someone literally had to push me off the cliff because I have such control issues. And so I remember Victoria dosed me for the first one, and I was just fighting with myself the whole time. And it's so frustrating. Jesse, I don't know if you've had that experience where you're just like, oh my gosh, I want to let go. I want to let go. I can't let go. So the next day I came back, I was just push me, just push me. And it was a huge experienced the ego death. It's been well over a year, and I'm still integrating that experience. And that's how it should be. You guys, the medicine is just like, it's such a small part of this healing journey. It's all about the integration.
100%. I'm still integrating the first time I ever met the medicine, which was in 2022. And I've done it several times since then. And I'm still integrating the first one because it was such a big experience. And what it showed me and what it taught me. And, this is why journaling and writing things down can be really helpful after that, immediately after, and the days following. And there was a big mother wound that I experienced in this lifetime. And that first experience with the medicine 5-MeO, it brought that up. And it was like, and I didn't do a full release. So I still had 1 foot out, 1 foot in. So I could really experience and be there for what it was trying to show me. And I'm still working on that. And I've done much bigger journeys than that, but it doesn't matter. It's what each one is different, and it has a different tone to it. And that's why I like it, because I come from the space of addiction recovery. And, you have so many people who are afraid that, oh my God, if I disrupt my abstinence sobriety, I'm going to drink 50 beers. And it's like, this is not what we're talking about. This is something, if you abuse this, you're going to pay the humbling toll. You're going to be humbled. And so I really like that there's a medicine like that can really humble. And of course, some people maybe with narcissistic personality and different can take this medicine and turn into a cult, or turn into even a bigger godlike, megalomaniac experience using this medicine. Of course, there's that risk, but I really like how there's sort of like a bumper there for addiction with it. It's like, to get addicted to this would be really challenging, I think. And if someone is, please reach out to me. I'd love to interview you, because I would love to learn more about those experiences if they're out there.
Yeah, I agree. So just a little bit more about the retreat. Again, a 5 or 6 day container, and usually about 7 women. And so I run a workshop every day for an hour. I, of course, sit in the space and observe the process with the medicine. Victoria's handling all the medicine. So I guess this is just my way to say, I've got my lane and I know what it is, and Victoria's got her lane, and we just do this beautiful dance together. And we do sweat lodge, and we do a trip to town, and there's a sound bath. So there's all kinds of massage, all kinds of beautiful supportive experiences within that container. It's not just about the medicine at all.
No, that place is Tepesland and that town, there's a sauna there, there's a pool, there's massive trees and nature and grounding, and there's so much more than just the medicine. So yeah, 100% recommend checking out the retreat. And so I think it's really exciting to have this conversation, because I don't know many people in the world who are talking about 5-MeO DMT and healing sexual trauma. So that was one of the exciting things of bringing you on to talk about this and just have a normal conversation about this. This is a way to educate people that, there's things out there that are not in the standard Western model of care and psychotherapy that potentially could reach certain people that other modalities cannot reach. Would you agree that there's just certain things that traditional psychotherapy may not work?
I completely agree. And I am a psychotherapist. So this is huge for me to say. And it's huge for me to step into. Like this, there's no way, shape, or form this would be compliant within my licensure, right? Like that's how much I believe in this medicine. And Jesse, from what I know, Victoria and I are the first people who have brought 5-MeO to sexual trauma. We were the first retreat. I mean, we've done our research, and just, I'm sure maybe some of this is going on underground, but not in such an intentional way.
Right.
And we're excited by it. We're humbled by it. I am going to keep going. I'm actually, for my own work, like, of course I'm still doing therapy, but moving more into a coaching container, because this is out of the box. And I believe in it so much that I'm getting out of the box, because what those ladies do in 5 or 6 days is like 2 or 3 years of therapy, if not more. It is that big.
I believe it. And I'm really excited to get this message out there. And, who knows, maybe we can offer the listeners a discount or something if they listen to this podcast. But yeah, I believe in it too. And it's the reason why I was 15 years abstinent sobriety and decided to embark on a medicine journey, which led me eventually to 5-MeO DMT, which has then really humbled my life in many ways to slow down and really take another look, because it was such a big experience. And I was very fortunate to have incredible integration, incredible support. And, and a lot of people don't have that. So that's why I love podcasts and getting this information out there so people can listen and be like, I'm curious about this. Let me reach out to Dr. Holly Richmond and let me ask about that retreat. Let me ask about what I can do and learn more about whatever the services, the somatic healing, the medicine, any of these things, to normalize these conversations, because the bottom line is people don't have access to it. They don't know about it. They have no idea. And they're going to sit for the next 10 years, 20 years. Nervous system is going to be a wreck, and they're going to not know how to go about having this experience that maybe in 5 days or 6 days can be a life-changing experience.
Mm-hmm.
So
and it is. And again, not to oversell it, it's not like you come to Tandava to the retreat and you're better in 5 days, but it's the most powerful catalyst I've found. So if you are stuck in your work, in your journey, and you need a catalyst for growth, and you've been in therapy for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and you're like, I'm better, but I'm not where I want to be. Like, this is just such a nice launching point. And so you get the 5 or 6 day retreat, but then you get 4 sessions with an integration specialist,
nice.
All included. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have like a personal question about my experience of the sort of shame I can still feel like as like a halo over me with sex and desire and these things. And, and I know that it wasn't a normalized conversation in my household, and it's no fault to my mom. It's just, that was just what's passed down to her. But how can we start to just have more goddamn fun and just be able to be normal with this conversation of sex or masturbation and just be like, talk about it more and just make it more normalized and get out of the shame. Because I'm telling you right now, it wasn't until I was like 40 years old that I started to just be like, this is what I desire and this is what I like. And this is, and like this shame just started to melt away. And, how can we have more of that? What's a way that we can start to embrace this as a society to start, stop just making this so shameful?
Yeah. So I guess my launching point there is this: sex and self are not dualistic, right? There's not me over here and my sexuality over here. Sex and self are one. So if we are ignoring this essential piece of our entire embodiment or this essential piece of our health, we're really rejecting or ignoring that essential part of ourselves. And we have grown up in a puritanical culture, right? For those of us in the US, we have to think about those roots and what has been important generations back, not just our family. Sex has not been talked about in a way that is empowering or informative or health based. And it really is. Sexually healthy people are healthier people when we can put that shame down, really understand our sexual template, which is work that I love to do with people, which means, what do you like? How do you know you like it? What informed your desire? What informed your arousal? So, desire, the psychological process of wanting; arousal, the physiological process of wanting. Jesse, for you, I'm going to probably say that was porn, right? Porn showed you what you should want.
Mhm.
And now in your 20s, 30s, I'm not sure when you started your healing journey, I would hope you would go back and ask yourself, do I really like that? Or do I like this? What do I, Jesse, what turns me on? What do I find sexy? What makes me feel full and whole as a sexual being on this planet?
Yeah, and I think that my experience has been, altered by watching so much porn as a kid and then having that as a young adult be there. And then when I really stepped away from it for long enough and I just started to tune into, what do I really like? What is it that turns me on? What is it? It was different, because even some of those things that I saw in pornography, I actually experienced in real life. And I realized that's not what I want. It's the
Mm,
little subtle things that are the big turn ons for me. And I think I would never have known that unless I had done the work. And that healing journey has been going on with that sort of like template of extreme pornography as like a model for getting off for me was since 2014. So it's been 10 years of a process of my own recovery with many different teachers and books. But eventually, when I just said, you know what, I'm just going to take a break on all this for a long time and just see what happens, I started to kind of come alive and see like, wow, actually, I'm turned on by that. I'm turned on by this. This is so different than what I thought. And yeah, it's like the little things, and I think, I don't remember if I read a post of yours or if it was in your book. I'm trying to see, oh yeah, you have like decoding our sexual template. And that's what it is. Like, what do I find sexy? And looking at the list here, like see the senses, right? See, smell, touch, hear, taste. And when I look at this list, I'm sort of like, oh yeah, it's not what it was in pornography. It could be something subtle. It could be tattoos, right? Like, it's so interesting. What
yeah.
is my sexual template?
Right. And it's so fun to do with people. And I use the five senses because that feels non-threatening to me or non-shame based. So I'm not talking anything about sex. I'm just, what do you find sexy through your five senses, and what turns you on through your five senses? And then as we go, someone could say, I find deep throating really sexy, or I find blowjobs, like whatever, whatever, oral sex, boobs, whatever the thing is. We can get more into that territory, but I like to go high level before we get to those specifics.
Yeah, and that's exactly my point as we kind of come to an end here. It's like, just normalize this stuff. Like this stuff, like saying these things, it's like, oh, whoa, you can't. What are you watching porn? It's like, dude, no. Like, these are just things these are just desires. These are just things that as I get to know myself, they're important to me. That's what and I just, even like my male friends, like none of us talk about that. Like, what do we like? I mean, it's so interesting that we avoid. We'll talk about medicine and all these things, but we'll avoid the sex thing altogether. Like, don't talk about, or it has to be like raunchy, which is fine, but it can never just be like, maybe I just like her voice, or maybe, there are tattoos that you know what I mean? It could be that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And I just think it's a powerful conversation worth having.
Yes.
So, yeah. So I guess one of the things is when you mentioned, and this is, I believe this is in your book, this idea of 10 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week of touching non-genitally. So like, kind of like maybe tantra, but can you maybe speak to that a little bit too? Like, it doesn't have to be, touching your penis or whatever. There could be other ways to have pleasure or self-pleasure. And I think I've learned that along my healing journey with erectile dysfunction and the internet pornography, and that I was watching in a way that was numbing out. It wasn't for the enjoyment. And so I've learned that like just touch and these things have been really, so maybe can we speak to that a bit? It's not just like going right for your right for your
Mhm.
dick. And then, it's like, maybe we could speak to that a little bit to help people out.
Absolutely. And you use the perfect word there. So it's a self pleasure protocol, is what I call it, instead of masturbation. And it's a combination of sensate focus, which was developed by Masters and Johnson back in the 60s. And I put my little spin of Tantra on it. So we've got some spiritual practices, or just something like as easy as eye gazing, combined with self pleasure. But for the first several weeks, that is not genitally based at all. So we're just touching everything from the top of our head to the tip of our toes, skipping over our genitals until we really get in touch with how I like to be touched. Do I like tickles? Do I like taps? Do I like slower rubs? Do I like deeper tissue massage? Like, these are questions so many of us don't know. So the first step is really getting back into our body, and then we'll layer in the genitals, and then we'll layer in orgasm, and whatever your peak sexual experience is.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I'm curious about you. So, what is your highest vision? What are you manifesting right now in your life? What is the things that you're bringing to reality right now?
So one of them certainly is hosting more survivor retreats per year, expanding them from just women to women and men, non-binary people, whoever wants to be there. Victoria and I are trying to connect with a 501c3 to get a little funding so we can get more survivors there without the financial means to get themselves there. So how it's been happening so far is survivors will come down, and maybe one or two do have financial means, so they will sponsor a lady that's coming from the next retreat. So really expanding that container. I'm also again going more into coaching and looking at holistic practices, so including some working with this wonderful woman who does nutrition and exercise, a woman who does hormone replacement and peptides. So really looking at the whole person to complement the sexuality, or the sexuality complements the whole person, so that we're looking at this from an inclusive and integrated way. Because I've realized, even in my sex therapy model, it's all sex. So what I'm trying to do is expand that a little bit and help people find resources, not just me, to support their process. And certainly the medicine is part of that.
Yeah, I love that. I think that one of the things that's often missed in someone's Rolodex is they will encounter someone with sexual trauma and they'll try to work with them when they're not qualified. And I think that's something I've learned through the 5 training and through my 12 years of studying psychology too, but really in the 5 training, about if someone has sexual trauma, I personally have not gone through that. So I'm going to resource out. I'm going to recommend you, and I think that's another important part of this episode is if you're a medicine person and you're dealing with 5-MeO DMT, ayahuasca, all these different big medicines, and don't have someone like Dr. Harley in your Rolodex, I mean, I think that could be a big disservice and unethical in many ways, because I can speak to addiction. I can speak to, let's call it, the small T trauma or complex PTSD. I could talk about that and a few other things. But when it comes to sexual trauma, I'm going to send them to you. I'm going to bring them to someone who's a specialist, because it's not that I can't help them. It's just, to me, it's unethical, because I could only recommend a book or maybe something I saw on video. So I think it's really important too that people are aware of having resources in their network, like, oh, if we're going to talk about holistic nutrition health, let's put someone who's an expert at that
Yes.
and give them. So I really appreciate you coming on the show, and we get to have a resource where people can reach out if they have sexual trauma and the skill sets that you have. So really
Yeah.
appreciate you coming on
Oh,
the show today.
oh, I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm truly, and thank you for giving me space to talk about it. I'm building a coaching collective, so there will be me, but I'm have 8 people that will be working with me, and all of them have a different area of focus. So it could be
Nice.
purity culture, it could be couples, it could be kink. There's just this range of people that I've perfectly kind of handpicked and curated to hit all the boxes, because I certainly don't know everything and I've got my little area, but I want to be able to offer more, and I want to be able to offer more at different price points.
Well, I love that. And if we could let the audience know like how they can find you, how they could work with you, would it mind?
Yeah, of course. So my website is drhollyrichmond.com, DrHollyrIchmond, and on Instagram at drhollyrichmond.
Amazing. Well, I am so grateful that you came on the show today. I did not expect it to go all these different ways, and I'm so glad you made me feel safe to go there and created a safe container. So thank you for your presence, and just thank you for all the work you're doing. And I'm sure we'll have a future episode and discussion as you run another one of these retreats with Victoria, and we'll get to report back and hear a little bit about your experiences with all these things you're doing. So thank you so much. Appreciate you coming
Oh,
on.
Jesse, thank you too, and for all of the work you do, and for this podcast. It is such a valuable resource. So I'll look forward to seeing you sometime soon.
Sounds good. Thank you for checking out Entrepreneurs in Recovery podcast. We are so appreciative that you are here. Make sure you go ahead and like and subscribe to the show on YouTube. Leave a review on iTunes and Spotify so more people can find the show. Once again, thank you so much. We have great episodes and content come out in the future. Thank you for being here. Have a blessed day.